notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we are putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States. A whirlwind of events is shaking the globe, and today we delve into a significant development with far-reaching consequences. The iconic John Deere's strategic shift, Trump's bold tariff response, and the subsequent ripple effects on American agriculture and beyond paint a complex picture of modern economics and politics. Stay with us as we unpack these interconnected events. We encourage you to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. Your support is crucial for helping us bring you these analyses. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We love hearing from our global audience. We will be drawing conclusions from these developments later in the video, so make sure you stick around. John Deere and the unexpected shift. For nearly 2 centuries, John Deere has stood as an irreplaceable symbol of American agriculture. Established in 1837, the corporation did more than just manufacture farming machinery. It embodied the perseverance and advancement of rural communities nationwide. Its green and yellow equipment became synonymous with the American heartland. However, earlier this year, John Deere delivered a shock to the nation. It announced the closure of several U.S. manufacturing plants and the relocation of its production lines to Mexico. This decision, aimed at navigating the complexities of global manufacturing, sent tremors through the industry and the communities reliant on its operations. This wasn't just a business decision. It was a move that would test loyalties and trigger significant economic and political reactions. We urge you to watch the entire video, as we will be summarizing the key takeaways and offering our conclusions at the end. The objectives behind this strategic relocation were articulated clearly by the company: reduce operational costs, enhance shareholder returns, and maintain competitiveness in the demanding global market. But the fallout was immediate and severe. The consequences struck hard at the core of American labor. Over 7,000 workers lost their jobs in the first quarter alone, a staggering figure highlighting the human cost of corporate restructuring. Towns heavily dependent on Deere's factories spiraled into recession, facing economic hardship unseen in generations. The impact cascaded through local economies. Small businesses, from diners providing meals to workers, to repair shops servicing the community, were forced to shut down due to the dramatic loss of foot traffic and consumer spending. It wasn't merely about jobs being lost. Entire communities were facing disintegration, their economic foundations suddenly pulled from beneath them. Trump's response: a 200% tariff threat, facing intense backlash, particularly from key farming states that formed a significant part of his support base. Former President Donald Trump, who had garnered substantial backing from rural voters, reacted swiftly and dramatically. These voters felt the impact of John Deere's move acutely, seeing it as a betrayal by a company long considered part of the American fabric. In a speech delivered in Pennsylvania, a state crucial for its agricultural and manufacturing base, the message from Trump seemed unequivocal: penalize corporations that move jobs overseas. His proposed response was a formidable 200% tariff on all John Deere products manufactured in Mexico and intended for sale in the United States. This threat aimed to make offshoring financially punitive and incentivize keeping production within American borders. However, in reality, this measure created a profoundly counterproductive effect. Instead of protecting American interests, it threatened to exacerbate the financial strain on the very farmers it purported to help. The price of a John Deere tractor, which previously hovered around $60,000, skyrocketed. Due to the new tariff implications and the company's shifted production, the cost surged to over $100,000 in just a few months. This dramatic increase occurred because products imported from Mexico now constituted nearly 70% of the new production line. Consequently, farmers, many already operating under significant financial pressure from fluctuating commodity prices and operational expenses, had to bear this substantial cost increase. The tariff intended as a shield became a sword turned against the American agricultural sector. Farmers react, boycotting John Deere. The reaction from the farming community was not just about rising costs. It was deeply rooted in a sense of betrayal. For generations, American farmers had chosen John Deere not solely for the quality of its products, but also out of loyalty to an American-made brand, a symbol of domestic industry and agricultural heritage. When John Deere seemingly abandoned them by moving production south of the border, the response wasn't channeled through loud protests or demonstrations. Instead, it manifested as a quiet but deliberate action, a widespread boycott. In crucial farming states like Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri, agricultural producers began switching to alternative brands. Companies like Kubota, AGSO, and Case IH saw an uptick in interest. These brands were often considered to have more flexible repair policies, offered easier accessibility for parts and service, and notably, did not impose the software control restrictions that John Deere had implemented, which limited farmers' ability to repair their own equipment. The financial impact on John Deere was significant. Sales for its dealerships in the Midwest plummeted by up to 40%. The iconic green Deere logo, once proudly displayed on countless farms, began to vanish, erased from barns, trucks, and farm signs, a visual testament to the broken trust. A longtime John Deere dealer in Iowa shared the stark reality. "We lost more than half of our loyal customers in just 6 months. No one believed this was happening. Crop prices plummet. Small farms collapse." The situation for farmers was further compounded by a harsh economic reality. While their production costs, including equipment, were soaring, crop prices were moving in the opposite direction. Data reveals a sharp decline in commodity values. From 2022 to mid-2024, corn prices dropped by 37%, soybeans fell by 24%, and wheat lost up to 35% of its value. The reasons for this downturn were multifaceted, stemming from global oversupply, the unpredictable impacts of climate change affecting yields, and reduced export demand due to international trade barriers and disputes. With already narrow profit margins, this decline in crop revenue combined with increased input costs proved to be a fatal blow for many small farms. According to United States Department of Agriculture data, the consequences were devastating. More than 30% of family farms under 100 acres went bankrupt within just 3 years. This alarming rate of farm failure hasn't been seen since the Great Depression of the 1930s, signaling a profound crisis within the American agricultural landscape, particularly affecting the smaller operations that form the backbone of many rural communities. Long-term impact: losing global position. This confluence of factors, corporate relocations, tariff backfires, farmer boycotts, and plunging crop prices, highlights that this is not just a domestic issue. The United States agricultural sector is demonstrably losing its competitive edge on the global stage. As production costs within the U.S. rise, American farmers find it increasingly difficult to compete with agricultural producers in countries like Brazil, India, and various European nations. Governments in these competing regions often provide stronger subsidies, invest more heavily in modernizing farming techniques and mechanization, and foster environments more conducive to agricultural profitability. The U.S., meanwhile, grapples with internal economic pressures and policy decisions that inadvertently disadvantage its own producers. Does America have a chance to recover? The path forward is complex, and the answer to whether American agriculture can rebound depends on the implementation of several key factors. First, the federal government needs to significantly increase credit availability and subsidy support, particularly for small and medium-sized farms. These operations are the most vulnerable and require financial lifelines to prevent them from being swept into insurmountable debt and bankruptcy. Second, substantial investment in domestic production infrastructure and strengthening local supply chains is essential. This would reduce reliance on foreign imports for critical inputs and equipment, mitigating the risks associated with global trade disruptions and volatile tariff policies. Investing in American manufacturing can create resilience from within. Finally, trade policies need careful adjustment. The focus should be on creating more sustainable bilateral and multilateral agreements that genuinely support American producers, minimize the risks posed by tariff wars, and enhance, rather than hinder, access to global markets for U.S. agricultural goods. Consumers also play an undeniably important role in this equation. When choosing goods, shoppers are not just selecting a product, they are implicitly choosing the supply chain behind it. Supporting American-made goods, whenever feasible, translates into a vote for domestic agriculture and the associated industries. Conscious consumerism can bolster local economies, support American workers, and contribute to the overall health and resilience of the nation's agricultural sector. Ultimately, a combination of strategic government action, private sector adaptation, and informed consumer choices will determine the future trajectory of American agriculture in an increasingly competitive world. John Deere, the symbol of American agriculture, recently caused a stir when it decided to move some of its production to Mexico. This could have a huge impact on Trump's America First policy, which he once promised to uphold. Immediately, he reacted fiercely, threatening a 200% tariff on John Deere products made in Mexico. John Deere is going to, and anybody else that does this, because it's hurting our farmers, it's hurting our manufacturing. And if you do that, you're going to have a 200% tariff put on the product that you make in Mexico right across the border. They think they're going to make product. But this move wasn't as simple as Trump thought. It could have unexpected consequences for the entire U.S. agriculture industry. For Trump, John Deere's move to outsource production is a betrayal. A company so deeply tied to America, now searching for profits elsewhere. No surprise that he threatened to impose a 200% tariff on every product from Mexico. But John Deere wasn't shaken. They continued to defend their decision, stating it's a necessary move to remain competitive in the global market. While Trump tries to intimidate, John Deere has shown that American companies can expand globally without being locked in by domestic protectionist policies. With rising production costs in the U.S., moving production to Mexico was a matter of survival for John Deere. In the U.S., labor costs are twice as high as in Mexico, and if they want to remain competitive, expanding into emerging markets is absolutely necessary. Markets like Brazil, India, and China are increasingly demanding agricultural equipment, and if John Deere doesn't act, they'll be left behind. That's why Trump's high tariffs aren't just a threat to the manufacturing industry. They can also put U.S. companies at a severe disadvantage in the global race. What's interesting is that this showdown isn't just about politics and tariffs. It's also a reflection of a big shift in the agriculture industry. Automation technology is gradually replacing traditional labor. GPS-controlled tractors, harvesting done by AI-powered machines, and drones scanning fields are no longer a novelty. But while technology is changing the game, Trump's protectionist policies seem to be holding on to an outdated economy, only deepening the divide in the agriculture sector. John Deere has proven that they're not afraid to face the pressure from Trump. This company understands that to stay competitive, they must expand globally. But will this force Trump to change his policies? That question remains unanswered. However, one thing is certain. If John Deere wins this battle, many other American companies will follow suit, making it even harder to protect domestic production than ever before. But they're going to have to pay a tremendous tariff, which means two things. They're not going to build the plant. If it's not too late, they're not going to build the plant. This country is going to make a lot of money, or they're going to build the plant, but they're going to build it in the United States somewhere, and ideally a place like Michigan or South Carolina, where we have a lot of auto business. But we're not going to let that happen. Cost of equipment has just gone through the roof to buy anything like that, because it just would be cost prohibitive. In the end, it's the American consumers who will pay the price as food and agricultural product prices rise due to these protectionist policies. This could force Americans, especially low-income families, to face higher living costs, particularly for essential items like food. As a result, this trade war won't just affect companies and trade policies. It will directly impact the daily lives of the American people. U.S. auto industry loses $219.5 billion. EU and China turn the tables. What's next? The U.S. auto industry has witnessed car prices soar by $15,000 to $30,000 in just 1 month. 200,000 jobs have been lost as the EU and China impose severe sanctions. Can the U.S. salvage the situation? Collapse of the U.S. auto industry. The U.S. auto industry has suffered a loss of up to $219.5 billion in a short time, as the EU and China impose harsh retaliatory measures. Germany, the EU's leader, has frozen the certification of U.S. electric cars. This means that electric car models like Tesla, Ford, and GM can no longer be exported to the EU, a market with over 440 million consumers. This is a severe blow to U.S. car manufacturers as they lose an important market, directly affecting their profits and industry growth. Additionally, France has imposed a carbon tax on vehicles weighing over 1,814 kilograms and with engines exceeding 300 horsepower, making vehicles like the Ford F-Series, Chevrolet Tahoe, and Hummer EV unable to be sold in France. These measures not only cause financial harm, but also place U.S. car manufacturers in an increasingly harsh regulatory environment in major European markets. The U.S.-Canada trade relationship and the U.S. job crisis. The situation is not only tense in Europe, but Canada has also joined forces with the EU by signing the Green Technology Access Partnership Agreement. This agreement has made it more difficult for American cars to be exported to Canada, reducing market opportunities in this close neighboring country. This not only harms the U.S. auto industry, but also decreases cooperation between the two nations in many areas. The worrying part is that in just 3 weeks, the U.S. auto industry has lost 200,000 jobs. Workers at car manufacturing plants, technicians, and truck drivers are all facing unemployment, creating a significant job crisis. States like Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky, where the auto industry is highly developed, have been severely impacted by the industry's collapse. This decline not only affects workers in the auto industry, but also spreads to related industries, causing production stoppages and reduced incomes for many families. Impact on the U.S. economy and consumers. The U.S. auto industry is not only suffering from market share losses, but also facing direct impacts on car prices and citizens' living standards. Car prices have increased by $15,000 to $30,000 due to the tax measures and sanctions from European countries. For example, Tesla has raised prices by $8,000 in Denmark and France, making American cars less competitive in these markets. Unemployment rates have risen, with over 200,000 workers losing their jobs, causing a sharp increase in unemployment in auto-producing regions like Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky. At the same time, living standards have significantly decreased as consumer spending dropped by 3 to 5% due to inflation and job losses. This is a major shock to the U.S. economy and to workers dependent on the auto industry. Predictions for the future of the U.S. auto industry. Looking ahead, the U.S. auto industry is facing a strong decline. In the next 3 to 5 years, the sector could lose 5 to 10% of its global market share if it fails to adapt to international standards and regulations. Europe and Asia are continuing to strengthen their positions in the auto industry, while the U.S. still struggles to adjust its regulations on technology and environmental protection. Specifically, confidence in U.S. manufacturing regulations and standards is dwindling. International partners are reducing cooperation and shifting towards countries with higher and more sustainable standards. This could result in the U.S. economy being isolated in the near future. Other countries, especially in Europe and Asia, will continue to grow stronger and intensify competition, weakening the U.S. position on the international stage. Japan's quiet response. Outsmarting tariffs with strategy. Over $50 billion worth of Japanese cars are at risk right inside the U.S. market. But instead of loud protests, Japan made its move like a quiet game of chess. So here's the question. Is America building trade walls or accidentally locking up its own garage? In March 2025, the U.S. government announced a 25% tariff on vehicles imported from Mexico and Canada. At first glance, it looked like a move against North American partners, but in reality, it hit Japanese automakers the hardest. Brands like Toyota, Honda, Nissan, and Mazda have been building cars in those two countries for years to reduce costs, speed up delivery, and streamline supply chains. According to Automotive News, Japanese automakers hold over 35% of the U.S. auto market, worth around $50 billion annually. This wasn't just a tax, it was a direct blow to a longtime ally. The tariffs not only threatened Japan's profits, but also jeopardized the jobs of thousands of workers in Mexico and Canada. With such an integrated global supply chain, the ripple effects were felt far beyond the U.S. borders, pushing Japan to rethink its strategy. No shouting, no press conferences, just a calculated response. Toyota invested $5 billion in hybrid production in Japan, targeting exports to Europe and Southeast Asia. Honda expanded production in Thailand, where it already operates 3 major plants, producing up to 300,000 vehicles per year, and explored new investments in Vietnam. Nissan planned to launch a budget EV Leaf 2025 priced around $20,000, a range where most U.S. automakers still struggle to compete. This wasn't a scramble. It was a response that had been in the making since 2018, when Japan began preparing for the return of trade protectionism. The backfire. Is America feeling the heat? Right after the tariffs, Japanese car prices in the U.S. jumped by 5 to 10%. Delivery times grew longer, but American car sales didn't spike. Consumers still preferred Japanese models for their durability, fuel efficiency, and low maintenance costs. Dealerships from Michigan to Texas reported stock shortages and slower sales. Local parts suppliers saw fewer orders from Japanese firms. Meanwhile, U.S. automakers struggled to meet demand in the small car and efficient vehicle segments. It's like building a fence to keep out the neighbors and accidentally blocking your own driveway. Japan didn't wait for damage, they planned ahead. Heavy investments in solid-state batteries and electric vehicles, diversified production across Southeast Asia to reduce costs and dodge political risks, forged deeper alliances with the EU, where strict environmental standards match Japan's strengths. Now Toyota, Nissan, and Honda aren't just staying in the game, they're leading the next chapter. In addition to these strategic moves, Japan is also focusing on cutting-edge manufacturing technology, including automation and production lines to increase efficiency. This allows Japanese automakers to scale up output without compromising quality. Furthermore, they are exploring alternative energy sources to power their plants, reinforcing their commitment to sustainability. By accelerating the development of EV infrastructure, Japan has secured a strong foothold in green transportation. The government's support for these initiatives has created a favorable environment for the growth of new technologies in Japan. All of this ensures that Japan's automakers are not just competitors, they are setting the industry's future direction. Market share maintained, influence expanded. Months later, the numbers speak for themselves. Japanese automakers still hold over 35% of the U.S. market, earning $30 billion from hybrid and EV sales alone. Factories in Thailand and Indonesia ramped up production, filling gaps left by Mexico and Canada. Tariffs may have gone up, but consumer preference for Japanese cars hasn't gone down. Tech advantage, reliability, and flexibility kept them in the lead. While the U.S. auto industry looks for new footing, Japan has already moved ahead, quietly but decisively. As one Japanese executive put it, "We don't need to put out fires. We just make sure they never reach the engine." The EU isn't playing nice anymore. A brutal wake-up call for U.S. big tech after Trump's tariff strike. $38 billion from Meta, $101 billion from Apple, $100 billion from Google, all from Europe. Trump raised tariffs. The EU clapped back, not with steel or sedans, but by going straight for America's Achilles heel. April 2025, Trump finger-pointed westward, stood at the podium and declared, "I'm slapping a 20% tariff on all EU goods. They're bleeding America dry." It sounded like a blockbuster movie. Then the numbers showed up and killed the climax. European Commission. That's just wrong. WTO. Statistical nonsense. Economists. It's math you get when a fifth grader guesses on a trade test. Reality check. The EU imposes an average tariff of only 1% to 4.8% on U.S. goods. So where did Trump pull the 39% number from? Simple. In 2024, the U.S. ran a $235.6 billion trade deficit with the EU, importing $605.8 billion worth of goods. Divide the two, and voila, 38.9%. Round it up, a number. Yes, a real tariff rate? Not even close. Trump screams about being exploited, but the US is the one cashing the check. The real question isn't who taxed whom. It's who's playing the global leverage game better. The EU didn't strike back. They went for the throat. The EU didn't retaliate with wines or steel. They didn't hit the warehouse. They went straight for the data vault. Big tech, America's pride and profit, also happens to be its most exposed nerve. Europe doesn't have a Google of Brussels or an Apple Europe edition, but guess what? They control the playground. And this time they didn't kick the shins. They tightened the noose. No bullets, no smoke, just law. Big tech's dangerous dependence on Europe. Let's break it down. Meta pulled in $38.36 billion from Europe. That's over 23% of its global revenue. Google, or should we say Alphabet, raked in $100+ billion from the EU and EMEA. Apple banked $101.3 billion. That's 26% of total revenue, with $42 billion in operating profits. Amazon made $43.4 billion in Q4 2024 international sales, mostly from Europe. They can't leave Europe. Leaving means losing market share. Losing market share means losing dominance, and losing dominance, well, big tech stops being big. The EU's counterstrike, cutting profits without spilling blood. Brussels doesn't launch missiles, they file legislation. First cut, data with GDPR and the EU Data Act. The message was crystal clear. Our data, our rules. Google, hand over the algorithm. Amazon, don't even think about exporting your warehouse insights. Meta might have to share user emotions with a rival from Berlin. Without data, big tech is just a sports car without gas. Second cut, digital taxes. The EU looks at app stores, YouTube ads, and says, who's making money here and dodging taxes? 3% tax on total revenue, profit or not. Doesn't matter. Google earns $1 billion, pay $30 million just for showing up. Third strike, sector-specific targeting. No blind swings. They aim where it hurts most. AI, EVs, and batteries, the sectors where America is printing gold. EU demands battery sourcing transparency, CO2 tracking, even proof that your AI doesn't have bias. They're not blocking you. They're burying you in clauses, subclauses, and footnotes. Final move. The ACI's stealth strike anti-coercion instrument. Sounds like a spy thriller, right? Reality? Sorry, American companies can't bid, and that patent? It's conditionally accessible. No blood, no boom, but every clause a sleepless night for US CEOs and their lawyers. This isn't just economics. It's a battle for who writes the rulebook. This isn't a trade war anymore. It's a war over who defines power in the digital age. The EU doesn't need to shout. They write, and the world reads. And the US? Still rich, but no longer the rule maker. Big tech? Still huge, but now they're playing on someone else's field. 2 million cars missing. Trump's tariffs crash US auto industry. 2 million cars won't be sold in 2025. Why? Trump thought auto tariffs would keep companies in the US, but instead, they're running faster than he is when he's being sued. Toyota and Honda just kicked production out of the US and moved their entire operations to Mexico. Toyota lost $12 billion, and Honda lost $8 billion. Why? And what we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. Trump decided to impose a 25% tariff on imported cars, and the big players just ran off to Mexico to make money. So what's so great about Mexico? No tariffs. That's it. Companies like Nissan, Hyundai, and Kia couldn't care less about Trump's advice. They don't have to pay tariffs. They don't have to deal with risks. That's why they moved all production to Mexico. Toyota and Honda invested over $10 billion in U.S. production, but now they're shutting down factories to avoid Trump's tariffs. Kia is developing a new pickup truck, possibly for U.S. production, but not because Trump's helping, but because they need to avoid tariffs. So the big question is, does Trump know that creating tariffs won't keep companies here? Instead, they're running away. The rising car prices aren't just rumors. They're a painful reality. Car prices have gone up, and guess what? And it's not even certain how much of a price increase we're looking at. We've seen, you said earlier, $5,000 to $10,000. We've seen something tank similar with $3,000 to $12,000. But the automakers aren't quite certain yet exactly how they're going to adjust We could be paying an extra $3,000 to $5,000 for an SUV because of this policy. The numbers don't lie. A 25% tariff makes everything more expensive. Toyota said they wouldn't raise prices immediately, but why? They're absorbing the costs, including engines, transmissions, and everything else you can think of. But once the tariffs aren't reduced, the quality and production will drop. Small suppliers won't be able to survive, and the result? Car prices will keep soaring. A parts shortage is threatening the industry because one missing part can shut down production immediately. 80% of automotive suppliers have less than 50 employees, and they're struggling badly because they can't withstand these high tariffs. Small companies don't have the capital to deal with this volatility. They'll close in the next year if there's no support from the government or large corporations. Trump's policies aren't just pushing big companies away, they're destroying small businesses. The result? A collapsing industry, and workers will pay the price for his decisions. Make the cost of fixing cars go up, and we fix our cars before we put them on the lots. That in turn would get turned over to the consumer. Car loan interest rates? They've hit 6 to 7%, an unheard of high. Import car prices? They're forecast to rise by 10 to 15% this year, thanks to Trump and his not-so-wise decisions. So what do these numbers mean? 2 million cars won't be sold in 2025 because consumers can't afford to buy new cars at these sky-high prices. The market will stall. High interest rates and inflation will leave consumers with only one option: keep driving their old cars until they can't run anymore. Consumers simply can't afford new cars. And as a result, the U.S. auto industry is facing a crisis. Those who have dedicated years in automobile factories are now facing the threat of unemployment. 50,000 workers will lose their jobs in 2025. Regions like Michigan, Ohio, and Tennessee, where auto factories are concentrated, are now witnessing a wave of closures. So why doesn't Trump consider these hardworking people when making these decisions? Thousands of workers are losing their jobs just because of an unreasonable tariff decision. Factories are shrinking, workers are losing their jobs, and local communities are struggling. Yesterday, Bloomberg News reported that Beijing had ordered Chinese airlines to halt deliveries of all Boeing aircraft. Neither Boeing. China has decided to stop purchasing Boeing aircraft, which means Boeing could lose up to $12 billion in revenue per year. Can the U.S. aviation industry and the economy handle such a shock? Earlier this year, China instructed its airlines to stop accepting Boeing aircraft deliveries and halt purchasing parts from U.S. companies. This is part of the trade war and could lead to Boeing losing up to $12 billion in annual revenue. Currently, Boeing has 4,500 aircraft on its global order book, with about 1,200 of those coming from Chinese airlines, representing 26 to 28% of the company's total orders. This means China is a critical market for Boeing. Each wide-body plane costs around $300 million, while narrow-body planes go for around $110 million. Not to mention the maintenance contracts and spare parts revenue. If China stops buying, Boeing could face a huge revenue loss. This move doesn't just affect Boeing. It also impacts America's aerospace supply chain, with thousands of jobs potentially being lost as suppliers like Spirit AeroSystems, Gulfstream, and Honeywell face reduced orders. Boeing employs around 140,000 people, with 30,000 directly working in aircraft manufacturing. If Boeing's profits drop by just 1%, thousands of jobs will be threatened. And this won't just impact Boeing. It will send shockwaves through thousands of Boeing subcontractors and suppliers across the country, who will face the possibility of job cuts and factory closures. The U.S. aviation industry is not only a massive industry, it's a key contributor to the national economy. And when Boeing struggles, the entire U.S. economy feels the ripple effect. The decline in revenue from contracts with China could force the U.S. economy to pay a high price. The U.S. exports $130 to $140 billion in aerospace products each year, with China accounting for 15 to 18% of that total. When China stops buying Boeing aircraft, it doesn't just hit Boeing's revenue, it leads to billions of dollars in losses for the U.S. economy. Boeing isn't the only company feeling the pinch. Major companies like Spirit Aerospace Systems, Gulfstream, Honeywell, and thousands of aircraft component suppliers across the country could also face serious challenges. If orders from China drop, thousands of workers in this supply chain will be affected, and some could even lose their jobs. China has stated that it will continue retaliating, not only against Boeing, but also against other strategic sectors like agriculture and energy. The Trump administration insists it will not compromise and continues to blame China for the stalemate. However, if this tension persists, the U.S. economy will not only lose Boeing contracts, but could also face a full-blown trade crisis. If this tension continues, Boeing could lose over $150 billion from contracts with China and international partners. This would not only seriously impact Boeing, but could also lead to a decline in the company's market value by up to $50 billion. The impact would ripple across the aviation industry, with thousands of jobs potentially being lost. Aircraft parts manufacturers and component suppliers would be the hardest hit. These losses wouldn't just harm Boeing, but could also deal a blow to the global economy due to declining exports and supply chain disruptions. If this situation persists, the global economy could witness a decline in international trade, affecting other industries and posing serious risks to global economic growth. This is truly a wake-up call about the dangers of over-relying on major trade partners and the devastating impact it can have when tensions escalate. If this tension continues, Boeing could lose over $150 billion from contracts with China and international partners. This would not only seriously impact Boeing, but could also lead to a decline in the company's market value by up to $50 billion. The impact would ripple across the aviation industry, with thousands of jobs potentially being lost. Aircraft parts manufacturers and component suppliers would be the hardest hit. These losses wouldn't just harm Boeing, but could also deal a severe blow to the global economy due to supply chain disruptions and a decline in exports on top of that, Boeing could lose $50 billion in market value. And along with that, thousands of jobs in the aviation industry could be lost. This is truly a wake-up call about the dangers of over-relying on major trade partners and the devastating impact it can have when tensions escalate. If this tension continues, Boeing could lose over $150 billion from contracts with China and international partners. This wouldn't just hurt Boeing. It could deal a severe blow to the global economy due to supply chain disruptions and a decline in exports on top of